Oh my God. So, part two of Does God Exist with on Beyond the Borderline with your host, Connor, Cam, Ryan, and Phil.
Okay.
Nice.
Slightly lackluster intro, but we'll take it. We'll take it.
Connor's having an off week, guys.
Hey, they can't all be winners.
Yeah, so we'll just finish up last episode's discussion on whether or not God exists. Yeah, totally not a extremely long conversation that could be like 50 episodes, but anyway. So basically what I was saying towards the end was just basically the intelligent design argument is probably the most compelling. And there's no real answer for that in this age of science and rationality and enlightenment. There's still no true explanation for how the universe was created and how it operates on a set of fundamental uniform rules. It was who said it? Dr. Emily Baldwin. This is an interesting quote that one of the most important numbers in physics, the proton electron mass ratio, is the same in a galaxy 6 billion light years away as it is on Earth. Right? It just puts into scope that these laws that allow for matter to exist and for everything to exist are uniform. They're constant, they're provable, and thus a law had to have someone who wrote the law, right? And then just to kind of close off this whole discussion, there's this other compelling quote by Richard Feynman, who was he won a Nobel Prize for quantum electrodynamics. He said, quote, "Why nature is mathematical is a mystery. The fact that there are rules at all is kind of a miracle." This is a Nobel Prize winner, right? And so it's true, and these people still don't have an explanation. And so it is miraculous. We take it for granted, but God being something real, being someone who designed the universe and everything in it, is the answer, I think. So anyway, Phil didn't really get a chance to speak, so we'll sauce it over to him. And Phil,
That's the template, it seems. It's all good. It's all good.
feel free to go on for as long as you want. Just
Yeah.
give us all your thoughts. And
So,
yeah.
not to sound like a broken record, but I think there's one thing that we didn't quite mention. And first, I'm going to go into something that we did mention was kind of how, or my personal take on it is that going off of Cam's thought of, this divine perfection. Picture like a time lapse of Manhattan, everything moving in perfect synchrony, cars going by, pedestrians, it's mathematical in nature. It's so perfect. And to think that we're having these interactions and we're not killing each other, and we have these rules that we abide by socially, biologically, that there's just something so unique about it I find really cool. And kind of how we're just chilling in a marble in infinite space and time, just chilling. Everything just works. You turn on a light switch, you have electricity. You can read a book, you can watch TV. It's just kind of miraculous how that works. Another thing I wanted to talk about was the
How does that prove that
notion.
God's real?
Well, here's the thing. It's the notion of the fear of God and how that's somewhat biologically based. Like when you kind of my anecdote is if I were to do something bad, you would feel something visceral in you. Now, whether that's something baked into your DNA or whether that's something that's programmed into you and somehow God is working through you to feel that way. is very interesting. So I think that simply, like Ryan touched on, maybe not the belief of God is an argument enough to say that he's real, but in my personal opinion, and from what I've kind of seen in these 24 years of life, is that the one true thing is the fear of God. And that's, people will do anything to avoid that wrath of God, in my opinion.
Yeah, there's certainly like there's certainly an internal compass that every human being possesses. You know, whether that be a little bit more skewed than others, but that fear of God you're talking about, Phil, it's almost like we're constantly fearing that we're under like constant surveillance. So we're kind of predisposed to act in an appropriate way, because if we don't act in an appropriate way, we fear the wrath of God. What are the consequences of my action on a cosmic level? So that's one of the primary reasons for why I tend to think, well, maybe God could be real, because that sense of, you know, fear, that sense of guilt is innate in almost all human beings.
And
Yeah.
when you do something like that, I feel like in all of us, there's a switch that just, it can't be explained. Like you can explain, relatively speaking, with happiness, like just in words, but to feel like, ashamed, depressed, there's something so powerful about that you just try to avoid it at all costs. And that's kind of like um a checks and balances system, like yin and yang, and that's a great segue into what we're going to be talking about next.
Yeah. So that basically sets up our next discussion, which is, intrinsically tied to the question, I think intrinsically tied to the question of whether or not God exists. And that is whether or not there is some sort of absolute morality out there in the ether, like an objective moral code that maybe we've only discovered parts of, but that we all feel, And so I talked about in the last episode how we didn't invent math. We didn't invent the laws of physics. We simply put words to what was already there. We were simply explaining what exists. We were peeling back, peeling back the curtain was the term I used, and discovering or uncovering what has always been there. And so the question is that the same thing with morality? And there are two ways to look at it. And I think it does connect to your idea of whether or not you believe in God, but you can ask, are patterns of moral codes, so the fact that there are commonalities between morality among all people on earth, almost all, does that point to the fact that yes, there is in fact an absolute morality out there somewhere that maybe we know parts of? For example, everyone knows, or everyone feels that it's wrong to kill a human being.
Yeah, I was just about to say that.
Except
Not
under
necessarily.
except under very specific circumstances where it may be justified. But again, there's a difference between justified and
Even under
morally
those,
right.
But that's changing the morals.
Hold
right?
on. I'm laying the groundwork here. So you could say, that could be one argument on this issue, right? Because of the commonalities between different cultures, societies throughout time, these different moral codes, which sometimes take the form of actual laws as well. This points to the fact that there is an overarching morality created by God, possibly, that we have uncovered parts of. But on the flip side, you could say, well, look, we can point to differences in moral codes between different cultures, between different societies, and obviously as time has progressed as well, and say, well, because of these differences, that points to the fact that morality is purely subjective. And so there is no absolute. Now, an immediate rebuttal to that would be perhaps those subjective interpretations are merely misinterpretations of the truth with a capital T, right?
Mhm.
Like, just because there's subjectivity in moral codes doesn't mean that there isn't still a true moral code out there, you know, that we all sense inherently in our minds, in our hearts, in our souls, in whatever you want to call it. And you could also say that the progression of our collective morality over time to kind of be more pro-human, I suppose, less violent over time, is proof in and of itself that as we progress, we are revealing more of this foundational moral code that stretches through the universe, you know, that as we become more civilized, well, it goes hand in hand with becoming more civilized, but that as we progress through time, we're simply discovering what is true, you know. And so you can, you know, you could argue that because you know, corporal punishment was more popular 300 years ago than it is today, that that there is no absolute morality because those people didn't believe that that was morally wrong.
So
But then you could counter that by saying, well, but then how did we get here? Are we not in the process of uncovering something that is more morally virtuous than before? I don't know. Anyway,
so
that's basically the idea.
I don't know if I'd say there's like a more like there's a true moral code, because I think there's like, you know, like a human, like being humane to one another, and, you know, treating others as you want to be treated, that sort of thing. And like, you know, a code to live by, and ethics, but not really. I don't know if I necessarily agree that there's like an absolute moral code, because
But even the idea of human dignity is not something that's been around forever. The idea that the individual human being possesses some kind of inherent dignity, and they should be everyone should be essentially treated equally from a moral lens, unless you've done some kind of, you know, horrible transgression, is an idea that had to be discovered. I mean, that's part of the foundation of liberalism and of democracy and of civil rights and of you know, all those kind of liberal political philosophies. And so that's an idea that hasn't always been around, but it's something that we, you know, came up with. Well, it came to our minds. How did it come to our minds? Again, this could point towards God. But that's what informs our morals now.
so
You know?
for me,
I don't think it's
I 100% agree that there is absolutely a moral standard, a universal morality. And I think the biggest indicator for why that is true is the concept of guilt. Now, when people think of guilt, especially, you know, oh, I committed a crime and I feel guilty because I fear the denunciation that is going to be imposed upon me by society. So a lot of people think, well, guilt only exists because of societal expectations.
Yeah.
I argue that whether society is causing you to feel guilty or not is of no consequence, because at the end of the day, if you kill someone, you are going to feel bad about that. You're going to feel so guilty because you just took another person's life. If societal discourse and societal denunciation was the sole reason for a person feeling guilty, then crimes would be deterred so much easier in liberal legal systems than they are today. Societal denunciation cannot be the singular reason for why we feel guilt. I argue we feel guilt because human beings are not only greedy creatures, that we're compassionate creatures. We have a capacity to feel love. So even when we dislike a person, when we kill that person, when we take that step too far because we gave in too much of our anger, that light aspect of the human beings, because human beings both possess the capacity to do things of light and of dark, that capacity of light starts to overshadow the darkness because you just took a life. Life is, you know, we're hardwired to believe that life is sacred. Life has meaning. So if you just took some of that meaning away, you're naturally going to feel guilty because you didn't realize you had the capacity to do that. So I argue 100% there is a universal morality purely on the basis of guilt. Even when, as Cam alluded to, there are justifiable reasons for killing people, i.e., self-defense. Even if you kill someone in self-defense and you were completely justified to kill that person, you still feel like a piece of shit because you took someone's life.
Yeah.
You wrestle with that. You have PTSD for that.
Yeah, but then the question
Now,
is,
does
well,
that
what
go to
happens?
go to morality, or is that because like I think there's something like it's a little factor, but I think there might be something to be said about like our primal instinct to want to grow as a population. Like more human beings means that we're safer. Humans by nature are pack animals, so when you kill other human beings, you're making that, like, from like a way, like, historic standpoint, when you kill other human beings, that means there's less humans. That means there's other things that are now affecting. When you have more human beings, the human population is safer off. So is that a morality thing, or is that like a sub primal thing, or like a subconscious thing where you're like, I need more human beings around so that I'm safer?
Yeah, well, there are certainly some strong arguments about the source of morality being evolutionary. Like you said, and combined with sociologically, like socially, like, for example, not stealing things. Well, is that that goes into your whole concept of property, right? And ownership, but that's a law as old as time, is not to take what's not yours. And could that derive from our Stone Age, pre-Stone Age days, when it's simply a something that was socially engineered into us, because to take more food than you were allotted in the tribal system, or to do other things like that, could mean death for you, for others in the tribe, and could lead to could harm the success of your tribe and your survivability in the world. That's certainly possible, and it probably certainly makes up a part of it. And yeah, so I don't know. In general, though, I think that we have to try to answer this question. I won't say that I 100% believe that there's an absolute moral code, but I suspect there is. Like it feels right. But obviously, that's not a good enough justification. And we have to grapple with this question, which is that the guilt thing is a good point, right? Like we feel guilt for doing things that are wrong. But again, is that socially constructed? Well, different people feel guilty for different things, and obviously a psychopath wouldn't feel guilt for killing someone, but that's beyond the margins of what we're saying. But
I would actually argue that. I would actually contest that part, because I know the purpose of someone being a psychopath is they lack the capacity to feel empathy or any sort of true emotion. But look at one of the most famous psychopaths, Jeffrey Dahmer. I'm not talking about the TV show that just came out. I'm actually talking, like, if you actually read, some of his confessions to the police, he was deemed a psychopath, but he even said at the beginning, his first victim he killed, he felt guilty about it, even though he was deemed a psychopath. So not necessarily because he was going to be caught, but because what he did was just so heinous. So why do all human beings have that internal, like, guilt compass? And to get back to what Phil was talking about, the fear of God, I think morality is kind of like our coping mechanism to deal with the fact that the consequences of our actions, if God exists, will look favorably or unfavorably in his eyes. So the way that we tend to cope and manage that, and kind of, it's almost like we're living in denial, but our sense of morality is what helps us live with the fact that maybe there is this eternal judge that's going to judge us for all of our actions come the time of our death.
I still believe like that, like the moral compass, moral code, whatever, is derived from like our primal instincts of survival. Like you need more humans to live, and to not only to survive but to thrive. The more people in your tribe, in your colony, whatever, the better odds you are. And I think from that grew this idea of like the more of a, like true morality of a moral compass. It's just because like the instincts to survive and to be able to live and grow and not be exterminated, like
Yeah,
extinct,
that's
grow extinct, that sort of thing. I think that's where, morality came from. It was a birth from that rather than this thing that we're going towards. It's something that, and it's growing because as we evolve as human beings, it's like, well, we got to grow. Where's the next, what's the next branch? Where's the next step to getting to the next
But the other
stage,
thing
to the
is-
next level?
So you're
It's not-
thinking it's kind of like a defense mechanism.
I think
it's a
originally it was
survival
a
tactic?
survival. It was a survival thing that is like so heavily ingrained in us that now it's become this thing. Is like how like it was survival, and then it was okay. How do we thrive? And now it's like how do we get to the next step? How do we improve? How do we be better? How do we get better? How do we?
You're describing the evolution of human nature.
it's a compelling argument, but also murder is one thing. I think it's more applicable to murder, what you're talking about. But there are other things that are.
But it's
you know,
like everything about morality goes back to murder. If you look at it from like a primal standpoint, everything goes
what
back
about
to murder
lying?
because
What about lying? Why do we think
Yeah, so-
lying is wrong?
if someone deceived you, back in the Stone Age, like back what like like the first human beings, like if you take it from stealing, someone steals your food, what do you like, and then you can't eat that night. Then what do? You're gonna go and retaliate to that person the next day or 2 days later, whatever. You're gonna get your revenge, and then it snowballs into murder. Lying, same thing. If someone deceives you and deceives you and deceives you, then back, in the primal times, that could be like
Cam,
expulsion from the tribe. That could be, like that. It all
So
comes
how
back.
how does it?
I want to answer your question there, Cam. Why is lying considered, immoral? And I think the answer to that question is lying is seen as a purely selfish act. There is no instance where lying is in benefit of the person you're lying to. And I
No,
think
that's actually not true.
Hold on, let me finish. I think that perception exists because we perceive God as being benevolent. And if we are to be, if we are to act in his image, lying would not be a benevolent act.
Lying is not purely selfish, though.
Well, I mean, it is. Like, even if you say,
Like-
I lied to you to spare you pain. I never accept that argument. You lied to me because you also didn't want to feel pain either. Because
When you were a child, your parents lied to you about the tooth fairy.
your
for
parents
instance.
lied to you because it was easier to lie to you than to explain to someone who doesn't have full cognitive ability to understand, which is still
Well, like the
which
tooth
is
fairy,
still-
the
which
tooth
is
fairy,
still a selfish act in their benefit.
the tooth fairy is, I would say, out of your selfish. A kid loses a tooth and
Well, that's not
they
a
got
lie.
money.
per se. That
Yeah, it is.
Well, not it's now we're getting into the degree of what makes a lie and what doesn't make a lie.
No, it's a lie. The tooth fairy doesn't exist. You tell
I
a
see
kid the
it-
tooth fairy exists. That's a lie.
I see it more as what's the right word? It's a type of story.
But it's a lie. You're lying to your child that
Okay,
the tooth fairy exists.
I think it's beyond the.
That's beyond the scope of what we're talking.
I take
I don't think it's relevant.
like
Well, that's saying that lying is not always necessarily a selfish and bad act.
Okay, but
So-
that's more semantics. Like, I'm saying across cultures and stuff, lying is considered bad normally. And again, your idea of the whole evolutionary argument is a really good one, but also as we progress and as we lift ourselves out of the state of nature that we were in thousands of years ago, as we more fully embed ourselves into society, those concerns no longer apply. And you can say that, well, we're still tribal beings, and perhaps it's simply baked into our DNA or baked into our idea of social norms. But it is something to consider that as we elevate ourselves out of the state of nature, these things still apply without the pressures that would have been there in that tribal state. But anyway, Phil, you're gonna mention something.
Yeah. So I take the view that you have this objective morality that's unchanged, and it's ingrained in us, and then you have the social aspect of it, and where it's actually challenged in real life, which would be kind of ethics. So
Right.
you could take
But
the
ethics are different than
social
morality.
no, but you can take the social construction view that ethics are simply just a way of understanding morality subjectively, because different cultures could have very different understandings of morality, through
Ethics are
tradition.
completely different, right?
Okay,
But I'm just
but
saying that ethics is simply a way of understanding morality. Like, I think there's like a true objective morality, and then ethics laws, they're a system, a set of
so
rules put into place to better understand that.
I have a question then.
Right.
Is the idea of an objective morality an all or nothing idea? Is it every aspect of law, every aspect of right and wrong is an objective truth and is fits into that objective morality, into that universal morality? Or do only some, or can the universal morality only apply to certain concepts of acts that are considered right or wrong? You know what I mean? Like, yeah, I think we can all agree that killing is bad, murder is bad. But there are other things that you can do out there based on context that might be good or might be bad. So is the idea of a universal morality one that has to be all or nothing? Or is it something that has to be all or nothing? Or is it an idea that can kind of sit more like in a gray area? Like, yeah, there are some things that follow that universal morality, but there are other things that don't.
Well, it's
here's the
certainly, hold
thing
on.
that
It can't
I'd
be
like to look
nothing
at.
though. It can't be nothing, because if there's nothing that's an absolute, a moral absolute, then anything goes.
Mm. Well,
You know?
that's
But
why I'm
like
asking
in
the
many
question,
different
because
religions, there's different.
I can't believe that it's nothing. That's why I'm asking
There's
the
different.
question.
Like there's different morals and ethics that people take when it comes to like religious views. Some people believe smoking is good. Some people believe it's bad. Some people use it as part of their um spiritual and religious practices. And then some people, have strict diets because of religious beliefs. And that's ingrained in their morals, is like, some people can't eat pork, some people are like strictly vegetarian.
Well, so then this goes to a deeper question,
Which
and
are their morals, but not
yeah.
everyone else's morals.
But this goes to, well, some of those things are norms, right? Like, it wouldn't necessarily be correct to characterize them as morals, but I
What do you
get what
mean?
you're saying, and you're
It's
right.
against some
It would be
religions. It's
values.
against some religions to drink, others it's embraced.
Yeah,
It's
no,
against some religions to eat pork, and others
right. But
it's a feast.
some of those are more fit better into a cultural norm category than a moral category. But point taken.
But they're religious morals.
No, I know. Point taken, I say.
So then, if it's
but
not an all or nothing situation, then wouldn't that mean that since there are some things that are upheld, or that are beholden to the universal morality, and other things are not, wouldn't that in itself be an oxymoron? Wouldn't that be a paradox? Because
not if some ideas are inherently better than others. And this is the controversial part of this discussion, is we can observe that there are subjective differences in morals and in norms across the planet, in different cultures and throughout time. Then the question becomes, okay, well, are there practices and ideas, and including ideas about morality, that are better than others? And this is where it gets dicey, because you can take an idea from one religion, for example, or culture, pit it against another one, and say, well, you're wrong. Not only are you wrong, but you're morally wrong, and you're bad because of it. So this is, you could see where this could get dicey, right? If you take,
it has in history. How many wars have been started because of disagreement in religion?
Right, but in terms of being, I don't want to make any kind of claims about any religions, but you can say some places in the Muslim world, for example, that have certain laws relating to women, or that view women in a particular they have particular roles in relationship to men, and they're certainly not liberal ideas about gender equality and whatnot.
Mhm.
We certainly seem to think that we can stand on a pedestal and say that's not right. You know what I mean? And even though you believe that, it's still not right. And they can counter by saying we believe it is right. But then, are these just subjective differences, or is one person truly right? Are some ideas truly better than others? And in fact, not only better, but the best.
Mhm.
Is the idea that human beings have inherent dignity, for example, is kind of has swept the globe now. It can be found in almost every culture, basically, but that seems to be something that is a universal truth that wasn't always there. But, and connecting to the free speech topic that we discussed previously, it beat out all the other shittier ideas. So what is that if not an absolute truth, right? Something that defeated all other versions of the truth. So basically, I'm just spitballing here, but basically what I'm saying is that there are subjective interpretations that might not be subjective. Maybe they truly are objective. Then, of course, you ask who decides that. That's the problem, right? And we'll never know. We'll never know, except by the way that it makes us feel, I suppose. It doesn't make us feel good to oppress people. It doesn't make us feel good to castigate groups of people and say, you shouldn't do this. You're not allowed to do this. And again, it gets into dicey territory because certain religions and certain cultures have different ideas about rights and dignity and whatnot. But that does seem to be something of a universal truth, the inherent human dignity idea, right? And then how do we know? Like, how do we feel that that's right? Is that God speaking to us? And if it is God speaking to us, then of course there should be an absolute morality, concurrent with the laws of the universe, the physical laws of the universe and the moral laws of the universe. But this is extremely controversial, and I'm just trying to explore
I tend to agree with that line of that school of thought, Cam, and that's why I have so much trouble determining whether or not I believe in God or not. Yeah, that's where my confusion lies.
That's why this is such a great segue from the last episode, because these ideas are kind of inherently connected. But then, like, subjectivity is such a messed up thing, right? Because it's just interpretations, but interpretations of what? Interpretations of a neutral reality, or interpretations of the actual truth, And if you're going to interpret the actual truth rather than a neutral reality, logic says, then probability says that after a certain point, at some point or another, someone is going to stumble upon the correct interpretation, right?
Now, is the
Which
correct
removes
interpretation?
I'm saying correct, like again, I'm not saying that we're even necessarily capable of understanding that is the correct interpretation, or confirming that is the correct interpretation. But it might be, it might be.
In terms of probability, what's the probability that we've already discovered what that ultimate goodness, ultimate truth is, but we've passed over it?
Well, that's what I'm saying, is that like well, that's an option, but that's what I'm saying, is that like there are some things that we've probably already discovered that are just moral absolutes. Again, the concept of human dignity, I think, is one of them.
Well, the thing that scares me the most is you just said, like, we might not have a capacity to understand that the thing we've discovered is the absolute moral truth.
Yeah.
And my fear is, what if we discover something that is the absolute moral truth, but we don't feel or remain beholden to it, and we move on from it?
Well, that's the whole idea of cultural decay, and we could be in the midst of that right now. We've certainly seemed to have forgotten the idea of original sin that I mentioned earlier, or in the previous episode. But that's how utopian visions arise, right? Is forgetting that universal truth. So that's a whole another conversation, though, I think. Final thoughts, I guess, or response to what I just said. But let's try and wind it down, I guess. But yeah.
I think you summed it up pretty good there, Cam.
When's your book coming out?
Oh boy, who knows?
Yeah, I don't. I still don't believe that, like, there's like this universal thing that is the moral code, or the like ultimate morality. I think it's an evolution of, our primitive side, and then it evolved. As we evolved, it became what you would call now as, the like absolute morality. It's, and like as we progress and evolve, there's new things that are going to come to be as what you would consider like absolute, like a code, or like the law of moral, where it's like, this is the right or the wrong thing.
But
I think that just evolves with us, rather than this code that exists somewhere that we're trying to unlock.
Although, and again, I'm just speaking like freely here, because what I'm about to say probably contradicts something I said earlier in the episode, but it's certainly not apparent that civilizational progress equals moral progress. I don't know if that's been proven, and I don't want to go on too much of a tangent, but the atrocities of the 20th century would seem to bear that out. But I think that can be another conversation. I think it's best to end it here.
Yeah. But I mean, even from those, the tragedies that happened, there is like things came to be that said, okay, this is never going to happen again.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah.
Because of
so then you're saying is sometimes we have to go through that suffering and strife. We have to go through that thing that is objectively morally wrong to discover what is objectively morally true.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah. And like, I guess it goes back to the whole like biblical thing of like, and I guess this is a little bit last in the beginning of this episode of like, the story of Noah's Ark, right? Like the world needed to be cleansed. So you start with everything. You start from scratch. You go back down, and you make anew from the terrible things that happen. Like obviously it's like completely contextual. But you cleanse all the bad things, and you start from scratch, and you say, okay, this is what was working. This is what needs to change in order for the mayhem or the evil or whatever happened to not happen again.
Yeah. But if you are going back to the basics, then are the basics a fundamentally true framework that exists out there? That's a question, right? And we'll never know. We can only speculate. So I think it's best to end it.
We'll just end it there. Yeah, fair enough. All right, guys.
Good convo.
Yeah, remember, and let us know what you think. Let us know if you guys have any, different opinions or things to add.
We're certainly not. We're not like, we are not all knowing
professionals
by any means.
We're not a bunch of philosophers.
We're just speculating. We're having fun. So let us know what you think, and drop us a like, subscribe to the YouTube, follow us on Spotify, all the good stuff. And
if there's anything you guys want us to talk about, just slide into the Instagram, I guess TikTok now too, YouTube comments, whatever. Just let us know what you want to hear from us, and we'll see if we can get a popping for you. And in the meantime, take care, brush your hair.
Music.